And welcome back to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force, as it is our final episode for our fourth season. And I could not be prouder and happier with the two guests we have for today's show. Joining us today, as I mentioned earlier, are Battalion Chief John Salka and Chief Rick Lasky. Chief Salka is a 40-plus year veteran of the fire service, served with the FDNY for over 33 years. The last 15 years as a battalion chief in the 18th Battalion in the Bronx. He is a New York State certified instructor and also lectures nationally. He is a seminar presenter and has presented at Firehouse Expo in Nashville, FDIC International in Indianapolis, the New York State Association of Fire Chiefs show, and many other venues. Chief Salka writes the monthly back page column for the Fire Scene and Firehouse magazine, and I'm telling you, if you don't read those, you are missing one of the best parts of the magazine. Has also written for Fire Engineering Magazine, Size Up, and the FDNY Training Magazine, WNYF, and serves on the Firehouse Expo Advisory Board. He served as the co-lead instructor for the HOT Firefighter Safety and Survival Program at FDIC for over 10 years, and is the co-host for the podcast, The Command Post, heard on fireengineering.com, and Old School, heard on iTunes. He is the author of the best-selling books First In, Last Out, Leadership Lessons for the New York Fire Department, and The Engine Company, published by Fire Engineering Books and Videos. He received the 2001 FDIC Training Achievement Award for his Get Out Alive Firefighter Survival Training Program and has served as a volunteer firefighter throughout his entire fire service career. Chief Salka was inducted into the Firehouse Magazine's Hall of Fame in 2019. Chief Rick Lasky is also a 40-plus year veteran of the fire service, served as chief of the Louisville, Texas Fire Department for 12 years. Prior to that, as fire chief in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The chief followed in his father's footsteps, beginning his career as a firefighter in the suburbs on the southwest side of Chicago, and while in Illinois, received the 1996 International Society of Fire Service Instructors Innovator of the Year Award for his part in developing the Saving Our Own program. He served as the co-lead instructor for the HOT Firefighter Survival Program at FDIC for over 10 years, is a longstanding editorial advisory board member for Fire Engineering Magazine, and also serves on the FDIC Advisory Board. The chief is the author of the best-selling books Pride and Ownership, The Firefighters Love the Job, and 5-Alarm Leadership. I like that name. From the firehouse to the fireground, published by Fire Engineering Books and Videos, and is the co-host for the podcast, The Command Post, heard on fireengineering.com, as well as the podcast Old School, heard on iTunes. The chief has served as both a career and volunteer firefighter, and in 2017 was the recipient of the Tom Brennan Lifetime Achievement Award. Gentlemen, it is an honor and a pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Great to be here.
The honor's ours. It's great to be here, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And both the bios talk directly about what we're going to talk about today, your dedication in teaching our brothers and sisters about leadership and mentorship. So let's get started. And Chief Salka, we want to start with you?
Sure.
All right. So take it away, please.
You know, as you mentioned the book 5-Alarm Leadership. Rick and I, that was a joint effort, and we actually had a program before we hit the book, right, Rick? And,
1996, 5-Alarm
yep.
Leadership.
And I mean, obviously both of us have served in various capacities in the fire service where leadership was important. And I think we learned early, probably when we were company officers, how important leadership is and how positively or negatively it might affect your fire department's, safety record and efficiency and everything else. And we started keying in on that. Obviously, we both wrote numerous articles over the years on that and had other leadership classes. But I think the book, the 5-Alarm Leadership book, was the culmination of a lot of our ideas and development of a lot of our leadership ideas that we both practiced on our own during our careers, and things that we put together and learned even in class. We actually learned a lot of stuff and have a lot of stuff in that book that came to us during classes. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. And we have so many people who address the topic, but they don't have the experience to back it up all the time. They see themselves as leaders or want to be leaders, and they think that's the first step and key to start kind of bossing people around. But that's not what leadership is all about. I've worked in the nonprofit sector for over 20 years before I was injured. And I trained leadership people who were members of the nonprofit but want to be leaders, and I began studying the leadership program with them and started teaching them once they got elected to the board, because that's where my leadership came from board members. And I think that for them, it was for a lot of them, it was kind of eye-opening to see that leadership is not a matter of being able to boss somebody around and tell them to do something. It's a matter of being an example that encourages other people to follow you and what you do. Chief Lasky, what do you think about that approach to it?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. And, it goes back to a point that John made that, we were teaching together, get out alive and saving our own at the same time. That's how we got together in the early 90s with the whole written Mayday thing we came up with. 5-Alarm Leadership was a program that was born that turned into a business. But in 1996, 5-Alarm Leadership was a program that was born out of frustration, like you said. In fact, the original program, which is still one of the most popular all these years later, is 5-Alarm Leadership, and the subhead is Real Leadership with Real People. Because back then, you had some of our mentors like Chief Dennis Compton and Chief Alan Brunacini, and that was it. You'd go to a class, and no disrespect, where there'd be like the HR director from Treetop Apple Juice talking about what they did in 1965, and you had firefighters scratching their heads going, okay, talk about leadership in the firehouse, in our volley place or in our career place. And everybody, they were kind of missing their mark. So what we did as John and I, we just said, let's sit down, let's talk about the real stuff. Let's talk about life in the firehouse, how to become that great leader, how to become that great boss. And I want to point, you mentioned, kind of both. And I like that because there's a lot of memes, I guess they call them memes, out there on social media. And John and I actually did a program on this once before, the difference between a boss and a leader. And you see that meme, and I'm sure you've seen it, where it's like, there's the two columns, and the one says, a boss yells at you, screams at you, a leader rubs your shoulders, and a boss. And I'm like, really? I've worked for great bosses, and I've worked for horrible bosses, and I worked for people, so-called leaders, that couldn't find the word leadership or leader with two hands, a flashlight, and a seeing-eye dog. So it's not as much about a word as it is about the person and the traits they display. And our good friend Dennis Rubin has a column and did a book called "It's All About Leadership," and it is. The hotel you stay in, the car dealership you go to get your car serviced at, the restaurant you bring your family to, the firehouse that you show up on Tuesday night for your drill night or your shift day. It's all about leadership. It's all about those and those that are mentoring and handing down the baton, the skills to the people around them and with them, so we all become better at doing what we're doing. And again, John and I do a ton of classes in the private sector. We do it for the military, for the armed forces. And we've been to places where we've looked at each other and went, oh my God, could you imagine working for this guy or that gal? It just because they don't have a clue. And I think sometimes we promote people, like you said before, they're pretending beyond their capabilities. And I think we do a disservice by not providing people who are looking to advance in their career or to do better the skills, the stuff they need to be a better boss and be a better leader. I think that's one of the biggest things we're missing, is providing the tools to the people to do their jobs better as bosses.
All right. So with that said, and I think that's a great point. So let's suppose that the fact that we have what I call a neo rookie, he or she's not in the first year, they're maybe in their third to fourth year, and they've really enjoyed what they're doing. Again, volley or career doesn't make any difference. We're all professionals in what we do. And they want to see how they can maybe start becoming a leader. They try to participate in all the activities. They don't mind doing grunt work. They do it, but they come back ready to do the firefighters work. They're happy to be in that firehouse on their shift day when the community alarm goes off. And they're looking to say, well, boy, that captain is really good. He's always there next to me. He's always helping me adjust your straps a little bit. Here's what you can do to tie that knot better. And they start having this idea that I'd like to kind of start moving up. How do we take that, what I call the seedling or the seed, and we plant that seed? And now, just like with the plant, we water it and we wait for that first sprout. And then we start nurturing that plant to grow. And I think we can plant the seeds of leadership in certain individuals that we see in our organizations or our departments, whatever. So how do we start cultivating once that sprout goes? We see that firefighter who has a good intention and is interested, and they're very participatory in everything in the firehouse. How do we start encouraging them or start mentoring them to become a leader?
Well, and let me jump in there first, John, because again, I already know what John's going to say. We know each other so well. I know how he's going to answer. But one of the things that we both talk about is, I think, surrounding your new people, that probie, that rookie, with those that already have accepted the role of mentor. Some don't even know because there's no name tag.
Right.
We mention all the time, he'll talk about Willie Tracy and guys, and Mike Scotto, and people that he's worked. There's so many. I talk about John Copeland and Gary Apple, and those guys and gals, that Angie Hughes, the people that will just grab a hold. They can't wait for the new firefighter. And then they start with that brand new firefighter, and then 2 or 3 years later, they're still with them. They're still showing them, or they get this newer, like you said, firefighter transferred to their firehouse, whatever. The excitement of having a hand in how your department evolves into the future. And I think that's what more people need to look at, is what I'm doing right now with that 2 or 3 year firefighter, or even back it up to that brand new firefighter, is going to help dictate where our fire department goes in the future.
Right.
Our reputation, our image, how we're portrayed in the community is all about our people. And if I can have a say in that, golly, man, I want to have a say. And where John's coming from when he talks to you a second here is just, God, I want people to look at it and go, God, those guys and gals are incredible. And know I had a part in molding those people so we have a brighter future.
That's great. Chief?
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, Rick and I agree on a lot of things, although not all the time. But some of the greatest, and again, our leadership stories are interesting, and I think they're great learning points. But when I was a captain of 48 Engine, I was also at the same time, and I did it as a chief as well, I was also an instructor. I had my own company, and I tried to help folks do well in the civil service exams for lieutenant, for captain, for battalion chief, to make their way up the ranks. But I always took a personal interest in the folks in my own firehouse. I was a captain of a company that had 25 firefighters, from 1 year on a job to 25 years on a job. And you mentioned the people with 2 or 3 or 4 years on a job who are obviously they're not maxed out on knowledge as a firefighter, but they're starting to look for something else. They're starting to look forward again. And I used to pick them. I used to have, grab opportunities and say, hey, Bill, before you leave the office, come over here for a second. I guess you saw that there's a lieutenant's test coming up next year, right? FDNY announces it way in advance. And he'd say, yeah, I was thinking about it, but I don't know. Or a guy might say, Cat's not for me, Cap. I never do good on tests. And I say, wait a minute. You're a great candidate. You're a good teacher. You're really sharp on the job. You teach the guys in the firehouse all the time. Guys really respect you a lot. You'd be a wonderful officer. And I love it that I sort of not talked anybody into it, but I showed some guys how not easy it would be, but how doable it is for the ordinary guy to be a firefighter, maybe move on to be a lieutenant. And it doesn't have to be in a paid department either. I'm the chief in a small volunteer department, and I try and play a role in generating people's interest for the next election, maybe a year or two from now, things like that. One final story on that note, which just made my heart flutter, was it was a gathering that we had, a Christmas party that we have every year. The place that I retired from, they invite everybody back, and it's a big party in a big Irish bar in the Bronx. And
a bar? They met at a bar?
Never
imagine
heard that before.
Imagine that. They have Irish bars in the Bronx. But guys, you start talking to people that you haven't seen in a year or 2 years or 3 years, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, you're a lieutenant now. Where are you? 76 Engine. Oh, what a great place. And I'm at 40 Truck, Chief. What are you now, a captain? And suddenly I realized about half of the young men that were in the firehouse when I left 8-9 years ago, who were good senior firefighters, half of them are now lieutenants and captains. And half of them are officers on their way to becoming leaders and mentors in the job. And I just felt so good about that, because I love them all. And I thought they were all great, effective firefighters. And now their experience is being shared even to a greater degree, having moved up to the officer ranks.
Both those are terrific, because I've been a lifelong educator from the time I was 13 And my synagogue first hired me 2 months after my own bar mitzvah to start tutoring my classmates and paid me $1 an hour. And I've never stopped being a teacher. And I love it. And I love teaching these middle school kids, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, because we still are able to shape them and mold them a little bit. And when I got into this volunteer department in North Carolina, accidentally walked into the building to look at the trucks and walked out with an application. One of the day guys, we had 3 caretakers, 24/48s, and their job was to get the first apparatus out with who was ever in the station to go. And one of the guys took me and my buddy, kid I met, he was 18 years old at the meeting where we met, and he's still one of my best friends today. He's the chief pilot for a sheriff's office down here in the state of Florida. And this one day guy took us under his wing and just kept, anytime we were there, he says, come on guys, let's learn the truck. Let's go over the engine. You have to know where everything is in every compartment. Let's do it. Then we went to the snorkel, and because that was the requirement, but instead of just waiting for the drill nights, we got to spend a lot of time down there. And he whenever he was on, and there was one other guy who was pretty helpful too, and he would guide us and give us that path. And then the chief, with 8 months in, the chief said to him and I, my buddy, and he says, I want you guys to go to the State Fire College this early summer. We said, what's that? And he told us, and we said, well, Chief, we just joined. You got all these guys who are firefighters here. He says, no, I want you to go. Well, he sent us to 3 years. And even at the first one, I got damaged again, injury again, which was eventually what took me out later. But, and I got to see him a couple of years ago. He was still alive, thank goodness. And I went to his home, and he said with his little North Carolina accent, Stephen, I bet you wonder why I sent you and Richard to those fire colleges, right? And I said, I've always wondered, Chief, because I never thought we belonged there, because I did, because you guys were going to be my officers. I saw what you did. You came in as often as you could. You studied with Roger. You studied with Bruce. You spent as much time as you're here. You made your calls. This, even though it was a side thing for both of you, this was important to you, and you looked to learn every time. And it was my job to help nurture you along, because if you guys stayed here, you two would have been my next 2 officers from the volunteer corps.
Wonderful story.
Excuse me?
Wonderful story.
It is. It was a wonderful story, and brought tears to my eyes when I was sitting there with him, because I never expected that. We never knew that. And when I called my buddy on the way back to where we were staying in Greensboro, and I told him, he was flabbergasted. He had no hint. He'd been even a duty guy. They paid him for one of the duty guys at our second station, but he never knew that we were being cultivated to be officers. And I think that story, plus what the 2 of you have said, really goes to show that it's up to the current leadership, from the lieutenant, well, actually from the senior person, the senior firefighter in the house, to the lieutenant, to the captain up, when they see these kind of people who are showing a keen interest and are looking to be a sponge, what I call them in education. They want to soak up everything they can learn. They go to extra conferences on their own dime sometimes, just to learn more. I think these are the people that can be our leaders, tomorrow. And I think that a couple of years ago, when the millennials started coming in, people painted them with too broad a brush. And I think that was a mistake, because I think our millennials can be just as dedicated as we were in our days becoming firefighters. And if we have good mentors and good leaders to teach them, they can be the teachers and the leaders of our departments tomorrow.
Well, the difference makers, like you say, there are people that want to make a difference in those around them, and again, uphold the reputation of their fire department. And there's those that, unfortunately, they're few and far between that don't want to. We've talked so many times before about getting that new firefighter in there, and you get someone who's just miserable, and they curb that enthusiasm. They ruin that enthusiasm. You've got this new guy or gal that comes in, it's all full of energy and wanting to get into it, and unfortunately, you just end up hanging with the wrong person. Next thing you know, it's like, God, what happened to all that energy? And then you got to reignite. You got to light the pilot light again and get it all going again. And it's like running down the up escalator. It's like as soon as you stop, you lose your footing a little bit with it. But the generational thing, I'm glad you brought that up, because I know John and I both talk about this in our programs a lot. And I'm glad you brought up millennials, because in Louisville, Texas, they're still hiring some pretty freaking talented 19-year-old kids, if you will. And these people that are blaming generations. I've looked at it going, look, we've hired John and I have been around. We've taught classes for the Marine Corps, for the Air Force, for the Army, for the Navy, for the Coast Guard, for all of them. Met some pretty incredible kids, if you will. And I've met people in their 60s who were buttheads. I use an example. John, you've heard this. My dad just passed away last week. We had his service on Thursday. And my dad was a firefighter. He was a Marine in Korea, a sergeant. And I asked my dad years ago, so what was it like recruiting firefighters back in the 60s? And I didn't get 60s out of my mouth. And he went, "You mean them damn hippies?" And he went on for 10 minutes on his tangent about hippies and this. And I'm going, so I guess they had some challenges too. I mean, so I guess my point is, and I agree with you, is stop labeling people because of a particular generation. How about training them, mentoring them, leading them, and grooming them? And they're either going to, John's got some great stories about new guys or gals walk in the firehouse, and you look at them, and if you judge them by the clothing they're wearing, you go, oh my God. But they change into that uniform, and the next thing you know, they're kicking ass on the fire ground or on the firehouse. You got to order them. You have to order them to take a break. Stop what you're doing. Come here, sit down, take a break. And they'll take the break, but they won't sit down. They'll stand there. And they're just, they get there early. They leave late. They're just, it's like John's the chief of his volunteer fire department now. He's got these young guys and gals that they beat him to the firehouse for drill night or meeting night. And then they're there after he's long gone. That enthusiasm and all that goes along with that. It's just huge. And I just think we need to stop blaming generations. Oh my God. I think I have an article I did a while back that will be out, called Generation Blame. And I blame the ones with 28 to 33 years at a job that make it their point to blame all the other generations instead of mentoring and training them. So I think that's a great point you brought up.
I think we got to remember a couple of things. The first thing we got to remember is nobody in any fire department anywhere, volunteer, career, part-time, full-time, on-call, nobody in any fire department anywhere was drafted. They all joined. They all said, I think I'm going to go check this out. I've always wanted to be a fireman. I've always wanted to be a firefighter. I've always wanted to volunteer in my town. I've always wanted, that looks like a great job. So everybody that's here has chosen to be here. Now, is everybody that walks through the door really prepared physically, emotionally, technically? Absolutely not. That's why we have Firefighter 1. That's why we have in-service training. So that burden is on us. The other thing I think we have to remember, a little bit of a non-technical thing is that, and this is for the upper echelon of the fire department, who are firefighters still, assistant chiefs, maybe even company officers. You can't concentrate everything on today's, lineup. Who's where. You got to remember that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, one of these young kids that's either driving a rig or maybe even a young officer is probably going to be sitting at the chief's desk. You always got to remember, and Rick and I spent a lot of time talking about in our company officer class about this, that you always got to be recruiting people and preparing them for the next step and opening doors so they can see what the next step is. There are some firefighters, and I was one of them. I never went into the company office, not for anything, unless I was called up there. I never went into the company offices. And when I was a company officer, there were some guys I had to throw out of the office. They came in so often because they were a little bit more interested in what was going on in there, So we have to generate that. We have to promote that a little bit. And like I said before, not only just pick the people, but help the people, meaning the firefighters and younger members of the department, promote their interest in being a company officer. And say, I used to bring guys into the office and say, do you ever see what an officer has to do? It's not just what you see downstairs. I have to do the TPRs for timekeeping. I have to do the fire reports. I have to do the evaluations. I said there's a lot of paperwork to be done too, So it's good to open the doors and open their eyes, so we can keep the stream of people moving upward. Otherwise, you have everybody stalled at the bottom, which is a lot of fun to be a firefighter, but we still need somebody to be the officers and the chiefs as well.
That's true. One of the things I've used on social media is the kids that you think are millennials can't do anything are the ones who are in our armed forces flying drones over the Mideast and protecting our people because they have the anti-coordination from all the digital video games they were playing growing up. And these kids can do it. And now if you ask our good friend, Chief Charlie Werner, Chief Tech of the country with his new drone organization, Safety Responders, a lot of them are younger firefighters who have grasped onto this technology and they started when they were kids with a little toy quadcopters and stuff like that. Now they're flying $25,000 drones for fire service, police, rescue, all like that, because they had that ability from how they grew up. Just like your dad was in Korea, my dad, may rest in peace, was in World War II. Chief, I don't know yours, but I mean, our parents grew up with their group, and my dad was drafted, fought in the Pacific. My uncle was drafted; he was fought in France, in Germany. Thank God they both came back, and I remember my dad saying, because they made him a cook, and he said, "I wanted to be out there on the front lines," and I said, "But Pop, you were the third group in when the unit moved in. You were the third group, set up the kitchen. Somebody had to feed all your guys that you knew who were out there. You were you played such an important part. You don't even realize." He goes, "You think so?" I was so you weren't just a cook. You were the cook for that unit. Without you, those guys would have been eating coconuts and drinking water. That's all they would have had. But you were the one who cooked for them and gave them good sustenance, good meals, as long as you had the supplies to do it. They look to you because of what you did for them, Dad. He goes, I never saw it that way.
Well, and all too often, too many people view their particular position in their organization as just like, I was just a, and again, I keep saying this, John, I've talked about this plenty of times. You hear it from the pump operator at a fire. So what'd you do at the job you had? I said, I was just pumping. I just drove. I'm like, wait a minute. So you were just pumping. So Captain Salka is in there with his firefighters making a push, got fire ahead of them. They're trying to get to that back bedroom. They have water in the hose line so they can do that. You were just pumping? The value of the driver operator, chauffeur, New York, driver engineer, whatever you call him or her, is absolutely incredible. So you're not just a cook. That's the nourishment that an Army, our good buddy Homer Robertson says it, because he does all the shows on his chuck wagon. He's 40 years. He's on the Food Channel talking about an Army. We talk about runs on their stomach, if you will. Just like your car does on your fuel. And like you said, not just a cook. What you did was provide a nourishment to people, so they could provide the service that they were supposed to be, doing. You weren't just the driver of the fire engine. Look at what you did, how you got your people there, the quickness and how safely you got them to the scene. You weren't just driving. Oh my, so all too often it's like, oh, if you weren't on the nozzle or you weren't on the roof, you weren't doing something exciting. It's kind of looked, well, I was just safety. Well, really, and I just sometimes I think we do it to ourselves with, we just beat down on certain things or certain, tasks that maybe we view as not as important, where I think there's very little we do in the fire service that isn't critical to the success of the organization, both in the firehouse, and out. And not to promote a book or nothing, but the subtitle on our leadership book, Five-Alarm Leadership, From the Firehouse to the Fireground, is just that: fighting fires, doing extrication, some kind of special rescue. EMS are mostly all task driven. Everything we do, this because it is all driven by what we do, how we do it back in the firehouse on shift or on drill night or meeting night, which helps dictate how well we perform later on.
All right. Good point. Chief, you want to add to that?
Absolutely. Well, the points have been made. It's so important that today takes care of tomorrow. Tomorrow doesn't take care of itself. And we've all probably witnessed fire departments that are mired, in today, and they're never thinking about tomorrow. They're never thinking about the next election. They're never thinking about the next officers. They're not even thinking about maybe what skills or abilities are needed for the next officers. In my volunteer fire department, it's got to be 20 years ago now. It used to be, and a lot of volunteer departments have elections for selections, right? So they run an election to select officers. I've never liked it, and I still don't like it, but it's probably the simplest way to do it. So what did we do 20 years ago? We added requirements. We added training requirements to the level. So if you want to run for engine lieutenant, you have to have initial fire attack, you have to have company officer training, and you have to have engine company operations. If you want to run for truck officer, you have to have those same ones plus truck officer. When you want to run for captain, you have both the engine and the truck classes, and then, like company fire operations, structural fire operations, or whatever it was, scenarios. So we built on it. So you still ought to get the classes, and then you could run for the election, right? And there are departments that still don't have any requirements. It's just a matter of who gets nominated and who gets voted for, who brings them out for the most coffees or the most beers or whatever it is.
That's it.
So you got to pay attention to the officer selection process, whatever it is, in a small volunteer department like mine, one station, or a big city fire department with 20 or 30 stations. That is your future. The process of selecting officers and training officers is quite important for the future of a department.
Right. And I think the process that you just spoke about removes the popularity factor from it and makes sure that properly trained people are elected to those positions. And I think that's imperative. We must do that way, because if we don't, then we're electing people by, hey, as you said, he brought the coffee, or he takes us out for beer after the drills. But this guy doesn't know shoes from Shinola.
Right.
And then, God forbid, we come to a scene. What should we do, Lou? Oh, damn.
That's what you get.
That's what you get. Okay. And, if same thing, going back to the garden simile that I used before, is if you don't pull the weeds out of your garden, your plants aren't going to, and your vegetables aren't going to grow well. And that's what happens when you use a popularity contest to vote for your leaders of your department. And one of the departments I was in, that's exactly what it was. I came in, I was the only one qualified with firemen back in, this is 81, I moved there. So firemen 1 and 2, what we had, pump operator, driver, a high-level rescue. Nobody else in that department had that, not even this couple of the city firefighters who were there. And yet the best I could do was become on the board for treasurer, because I helped them raise money in a practice they had never done before. So that was it. But when I was nominated, I had friends who nominated me for offices, but I couldn't get in because I didn't go out drinking with the guys afterwards. I had a family, and I had to get home to that family. And I worked 80 hours a week, 7 days a week, but I still made over 50% of our calls. But I just gave up after 2 years because it just wasn't worth the aggravation. I loved doing what I was doing. I was happy to be a firefighter there. I had friends we tried to ride apparatus and go on these calls together, and we were a good team together because we kind of knew each other's moves, and there wasn't a boss. We just kind of melded together, and we all did what had to be done to get the job done. So I enjoyed it, but I think that's an important cycle that we're still seeing goes on today. And I'm glad to hear that in your department, Chief, that you've stopped that and you've made the people who want to be elected must have qualifications first. So we need to wrap this up because I know you both have other meetings waiting. And I do appreciate you taking the time to squeeze us in today. So what would your advice be? I know you can't teach a class now in the next 8 minutes, but all right, I can give you 12. But what would be your best suggestions to, number one, those who want to grow and be better in the fire service and be leaders at some point, and to those who are existing leaders and maybe aren't looking over their shoulder at who's coming up behind them well enough to see, hey, we might have some good kids here who could be good firefighters when my time is up.
Well, and I'll jump here real quick. I think, two ways to look at this. The new firefighter, the new guy or gal coming in, and then, like you said, the one that's already there, how can they have a greater impact? I think for the new one, I've looked at this before, is I guess it's look at the people around you and what do you want to be like 5, 10, 15 years from now? Do you want to be if you see this guy's, I have no patience for bullies and thugs in the fire service, but so do you not want to be the bully? Do you want to be the mentor? That particular firefighter, senior firefighter or captain is always helping people. always there. God, I can't even beat them to the firehouse for a shift or for a meeting. They're always trying to make a difference. They're always working with someone. They're always doing something. That was me earlier in my career. Was like, I looked at Chief Jack McCassin and Chief Eddie Enright, Chief Tom Freeman, and Tommy Schervino and Ray Hoff and people. I went, God, I want his passion. I want his command presence. I want his knowledge. I want to slap those all over me to make me a better. In Chicago, early in the 60s, 50s, there was a guy he had the Ray Rayner show. It was a kid's show. He was also a clown on Bozo Circus with Bozo and Oliver Oliver. And he used to have this jumpsuit on for a show, and he had little notes, paper clipped all over him. And he'd pull this one off. Oh, it's time to watch a cartoon. Oh, it's time. And I've always said, I want to stick those notes all over me. I want to take part of John Salka. I want to take part of Ray Downey. I want to take part of people. I don't want to mimic or imitate them. I want to use those traits to make me better. So as a younger, newer firefighter, look to the people that you want to be like one day. I want to be like that person, not ego-wise, not like, oh, look at me. I want to be that person. For the officer or the more senior firefighter, my advice would be, how can I be a difference maker? How can I mentor better? How can I lead by example? How can I be that person that new person is looking at? What are they going to say about me when I leave? When I actually leave and move to Florida or wherever, and they go, are they going to say, I might not have always got along with him or her, but I knew they always had my back. They always had me protected. Or the guy was always there for me. She was always there helping me or whatever. Kind of determine your own legacy, if you will. Everybody talks about leaving a legacy. Well, you can leave something on accident, which sometimes you don't want to do, or you can leave something that's meaningful that someone can wrap their arms around. And I think if you mesh those two groups of people together, you end up with some quality in your organization.
Good. Chief?
I worked with, and I knew Ray Downey, Vinnie Dunn,
Right.
Pete Lund, Joe DiBernardo. Well, these are historical names. These people are legends in the FDNY. And I was a young firefighter and a young officer.
I believe they're legends out as well, sir.
And I was just so fortunate to be exposed to folks like that and to actually work with them in the street, in the firehouse, listen to them, run training sessions and give presentations. And like Rick just said, and I'm sure you find this to be true as well, I worked hard to model myself. I would sit in a classroom and listen to Ray Downey. I would sit in a firehouse and listen to Vinnie Dunn. And I said to myself, practically loud enough for people to hear, I'm going to be just like him someday. That's where I'm going. They really set such a model. They set such a good example. And that's what today's company officers have to remember. You are on stage every day. When you walk through that door, you're walking into a Broadway movie theater. You are on stage all day. The lights might not come on. There might not be a microphone there, but everybody's watching, everybody's learning, everybody's evaluating and measuring and talking about you back in the bathroom, back in the kitchen after you leave, saying, I love working with this guy, or thank God he's leaving tonight and London's coming in, or whatever it is, So I think officers in general, company officers, but senior firefighters as well, and certainly chiefs, always have to be reminded. I think we have to try and remind each other all the time that we really are setting the pace for our firehouse, our station, our department, depends on the size of the organization that you're part of. But it really is a constantly evolving crew of people with a constantly evolving and developing list of skills and abilities. And you're not just coming into work, I'm just going to be a lieutenant to stay at Engine 2, and that's where I'm going to work out my career. Well, that's nice, but we don't need autopilot. We don't need officers on autopilot. We need somebody who's always thinking and trying to drag the guys that are in their crew, pull them up and get them up to the next level and help the chief ahead of them that's asking them to get something done, So there's so many attributes, there's so many ways officers can contribute to their department and the future of it that'll carry on long after they're gone.
That's great. I really appreciate it. Gentlemen, I know you got to run. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules. Deeply appreciated. Chief Lasky, we send our condolences on the passing of your dad. May his memory always be for a blessing.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, stay safe, stay well. Please continue what you're doing as long as you can, because we know that there are firefighters out there today who are looking to you folks for the guidance and the education and the experience you are willing to share with them. And hopefully those who listen to this today will take those words to heart and become examples for their department. And then those other ones become leaders in the future. So in the midst of this kind of crazy upside down world, stay safe, stay well. Please keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. God bless you. Honor and privilege.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.